if you were considering doing a
For
for
sale
sale by owner,
you want to tune into
you
this
want to
episode.
watch this.
The consumer thinks that the realtor's job is to bring a buyer to a property or find a buyer for their property. And I always...
Wait, it's not?
No.
That's
You're welcome.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Context to Contracts podcast. With us again is Miss Rachel Sartain, co-host Mr. John Jones. So let me set this up real quick. John, you said before we got started, like if you were considering doing a for sale by owner,
you want to tune into this
you want to
episode.
watch this. So this is clearly not my area of expertise, but
Dot your I's, cross your T's.
have taught, how many classes do you think you've taught on this subject material?
Too many to count.
Too many to count.
There's no way.
At least one a month for
10 years.
Okay. So about 120
Expert
times.
level.
Yes, this is expert level. This is mastery level. So what we're going to go over today is the specific Florida real estate contract, purchase and sale agreement. And we're going to kind of wrap this into specifically in terms of financing,
Right.
How it relates to financing. So, which again, I would tell you, if you're doing a FSBO and you add in financing, that's another layer of you wish you would have known.
Yeah.
Probably.
And just like Johnny was saying, you know, if you're a for sale by owner, definitely be listening to this. The consumer thinks that the realtor's job is to bring a buyer to a property or find a buyer for their property. And I always...
Wait, it's not?
No.
That's part of it.
Well, it's kind of like the topic of the show, right? Contacts to contracts.
Yeah.
Well, let's just change it up and say contracts to the closing table.
Okay.
Like I say that's where everything hits the fan. And if you're not on your toes and you don't know the language of the contract and all the deadlines and all the ins and outs, you're not going to make it to the closing table. So that's why I'm passionate. Like my first real estate broker, he gave me a copy of the sales contract. He said, go home and read this.
Study it. Yeah.
And I did. I went home and read it. I came back the next day, highlighted with notes and asking questions about it. And I still carry around, I mean, as a broker of 12 years, I still carry around this folder. What's it called? Contracts. And guess what I have inside?
Contracts.
Yeah.
Oh, and they have notes. Like,
wow.
I study it. As a real estate agent, you're writing a legally binding agreement between two parties. And so many people don't know the contract other than to how to fill in the blank. So I think it's such a valuable topic, and I'm very passionate about it.
So you're saying the real purpose of a real estate agent is not to bring a buyer to the seller. What is it?
It's to help the person get to the end goal. And the end goal isn't finding a house. The end goal is purchasing the home and moving into it, right?
Okay.
So the end
As
goal...
smoothly as possible.
As smoothly as possible. And the end goal isn't to put your home up for sale and to find a buyer. The end goal is to actually take the
deal.
money to the bank, right? And move
Yes.
on. So
Yes.
so it's a longer process than what people think. And I like to draw out a little picture. I have it. We can take a picture of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a very visual person. I've already
like
been
it.
showing you my drawings. But I draw out a picture where it's like, okay, you have the first appointment. And then either you start looking for the home or you put the home on the market. Everything's pretty smooth sailing through that. You might have a couple little hiccups. But then once you get to that offer, it's like just everything happens. And it's like everything hits the fan.
It's like one of those things that they put out in front of those gas stations that have the air blow through them, that kind of...
Oh, yeah. And really the biggest part of it is the emotions that the buyer and the seller go through. And it's just that roller coaster. And so as a professional, you have to not only understand emotional intelligence and behavioral styles and what the person is experiencing, but you have to guide them through it while you're keeping on strict deadlines. And it's not just the deadline for the realtor, it's for the loan officer, the appraiser, the survey company, the inspector, the title company. If you're getting repairs, like when do those repairs need to be done? Who's doing them? How are they doing them? Making sure you have receipts. Like that's where the hard work comes in.
Wow, it's so true. Like the emotional part of it. This isn't an emotional transaction at all, is it?
No.
I love when people say, well, I like commercial real estate because it's not as emotional. And have you ever read the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a picture in there, a diagram in there, that information comes in through our spinal cord and moves through our limbic system where emotions are processed to the frontal lobe where actually reason and data is processed. And so I always say you can't have an opinion on anything that didn't first go through your emotions. And that goes with statistics, numbers, anything.
True.
We have an emotional filter that everything goes through. In the real estate transaction, the thing we hear the most is, especially if you're a buyer, the seller's just trying to get everything out of me that they possibly can. And that is how they feel in the moment. And you have to understand that, and you have to be able to walk somebody through that process.
Yeah. So it's important, too, that the two agents play good in the sandbox. You had mentioned as we were kind of prepping for this, about what a transaction broker really means.
Right.
Can you dig into that a little bit?
Sure. It was, I think it was mid-2006 in the state of Florida. All realtors were assumed to be now a transaction agent. And so there's a couple of different agency relationships. There's single agent, there's transaction agent, and
Dual agent.
Dual agent is going to be more if you see it in commercial, where each party has to show that they have at least $1 million in asset, and then you can have dual agency. Dual agency is actually not legal in most states. So, but the two you see the most, and then you have a new brokerage type of agency. So with a single agency, you have confidentiality and full disclosure. Oh, and obedience. So
How do you measure that?
I had a customer at one time that I told him
your client wants.
I was showing him the difference between single agency and transaction agency, and that obedience piece wasn't. Yeah, it was one of the things that wasn't there. He's like, I don't know if I like that you're not going to be obedient to me. That's how I remember that one. So, but no, transaction agent is really you still have the ethics and the integrity involved in it. It's limited confidentiality. So if you were selling your house and you were buying the house and you said, Rachel, I know Johnny's up to $475 on this purchase. I really, my bottom line is $480. If you can, but do you think he'll come up a little bit more? If I went back and told you that, then I would be breaking that confidentiality. Okay. So I just have to be able to go back to you and say, the seller is still stuck at this price. What are you willing to do? But it has to be a conversation. Like, you have to be clear and honest. But
I don't think it really happens like that.
It does in most cases.
Well, yeah. So when you're working, if you're working both sides of the transaction, it is a fine line to walk. I mean, like if you're the listing agent and a buyer comes to you, which, by the way, guys, if you're out shopping and only wanting to talk to the listing agent, that does not mean that the listing agent is cutting their commission and you're getting a better deal on the house. Mm-hmm. That's called a variable commission, and not all realtors offer a variable commission. So that's first thing that the consumer needs to understand. But if you do, as the listing agent, bring the buyer to the property, it is a fine line that you walk. It rarely happens. I'd say probably like 1 to 3% of transactions you're working both sides of the deal. Most of them are with a buyer's agent and a listing agent. And so, and again, in the state of Florida, we're transaction agents, meaning we're working for the transaction. We're working to get it to the closing table. In the mortgage industry, is that what you guys have experienced? Is that the emotion and the language you get back from the realtors, that they're working for the transaction?
No.
What's your experience?
If it doesn't close,
yes,
we're keeping the escrow money.
Yeah, I mean, we get the emotion part of it. We get the, hey, these folks are, living in a hotel. They've got U-Hauls packed. This has got to happen by this certain time. They're going to lose this escrow deposit. We get all of that. Whereas like I'm more of let me tell you exactly where we're at in the process, and let's not be scheduling closings until we know we have a closing.
Expectation.
Right. And I think that what I would prefer we all do is we set the right expectation for where we at and what needs to happen to get there. But a lot of times that's not how it goes down.
No, it's not. And, I've always taught too, don't write the offer until you speak to your team.
That's exactly right.
And
get both agents and the lender on the phone, explain the situation, the type of loan, and what the time frame needs to be. In the market that we were in the last 18 months, we know it took a little bit longer.
Yeah, appraisals are taking longer, so it's like, I'm not going to put when the loan approval has to be completed because I have no idea. I'm a realtor.
Correct.
I need to call
because you're going on vacation that for the 2 weeks past that, you want it closed on that Friday.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So I need to call my partner, the lender, and say, hey, I've got this buyer. You've already pre-approved them. We found a home. What is the time frame I need to write on the contract for that loan approval? Mm-hmm. It's not a guessing game. It should be a conversation with your team members.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. So one of the things that we wanted to get into, part of the reason I asked you for your expertise on this is there was recently a change to this contract in regards specifically to appraisals. You kind of just brought that up, where if my understanding is correct, the loan commitment, the appraisal has to come before the loan commitment, which is a change. So in other words, we used to be able to write loan commitment subject to a satisfactory appraisal. Mm-hmm. That's changing?
That is changing, and there's a couple of things with that I'll just bring up. So the Florida Association of Realtors has a website, floridarealtors.org, and they have a summary of the changes. And so it's like, I have it printed here. It's like a page and a half. I'd say some realtors will read the summary.
Okay.
Most realtors won't even know that there's been a change. Very few will actually take the contract and read it. So as I was reading through the contract, I realized there were so many more changes than what this summary. So you can see, just from here, there's red lettering, there's green lettering, there's blue lettering, there's purple lettering. I have no idea what the different colors mean. Nor did I see a color code anywhere as I was going through this. There are strikeouts, there are additions. There's a lot of language in here that's changed. And so it's not just knowing a summary of what's changed. It's really about digging in and knowing how is it going to impact your business and your customer. But with the appraisal aspect of it, what's funny is, so you and I were talking earlier about when the Florida Association of Realtors originally put that loan commitment language into the sales contract, it was like the Association of Realtors and the Florida Bar got together and they created this sales contract for realtors to be able to use to help buyers and sellers with that transaction. They didn't consult with the mortgage industry.
Correct.
And the reason we know they didn't consult with the mortgage industry is because they put language in there that the lender had to deliver a loan commitment letter.
Yep.
And prior to that, did you ever see a loan commitment letter?
No. The only time we would really pull out that loan commitment letter was in the event hey, I finally got loan approval, but I need 2 days to close. And the seller's like, listen, if we can't close today, this deal's dead. Right. And so we would use that as a proof that, hey, we actually are ready to lend. And it was very, very few instances because historically that language, John, in our business has meant loan commitment. We are ready to rock and roll.
Yes.
This is a guaranteed mortgage.
Yep.
Right. Well, then we started writing loan commitments that had contingencies on them, subject to verifying XYZ, right? And the appraisal would be one of them.
Right. And so just with this language, and the reason I kept it kind of going is because we're talking about loan commitment. Well, the language changed in 2017 to loan approval. So I love when realtors put EMD in the contract. What does EMD stand for to you?
To me, earnest money deposit.
Right. Do you know those 3 words are nowhere in this contract? The title company calls it that,
Shocking.
right? It's an EMD, and the
Right.
contract is escrow.
Yep.
So it's very important that we use the language of the contract that we have the ability to be able to use. As a realtor, I can't create legal language. I can only use the language that's been provided to me. So it's escrow. So this contract actually calls it now a loan approval. So they moved away from the
Sure.
commitment conversation. And it's always been confusing, this appraisal piece of paragraph 8B of the contract, where it had stated, and so what you're saying is that on the loan approval, you could approve somebody for financing, but there was a contingency of a satisfactory appraisal. Right?
Yep.
And that appraisal in the language of the contract wasn't that the property had to appraise at purchase price.
Mm-hmm.
It was that it had to appraise to meet the conditions of the loan.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a situation many years ago where a buyer was purchasing, it was an $800,000 home. They were only financing 50%, $400,000 loan. The appraisal came back on that $800,000
this.
home.
You still got to close.
This was with us, right?
That appraisal came back at $750,000.
Still got to close.
You still got to close. And the agent was mad because they were like, oh, well, that's an appraisal contingency. They can't get the loan. I'm like, yeah, they can get a $400,000 loan on a $700,000.
All day long.
Yep.
All day long. That clause really comes into effect when you're looking at, let's say, an FHA buyer, 3% down,
Yes.
5% down. It might not even apply on a 10% down. It just really depends. So, like, if you're putting 10% down and you're purchasing at $300,000 and it appraises at $296,000, you're still approved
Down
for that
4
loan.
more and
Yeah.
financing a little
Yeah.
bit less.
Yeah.
A little bit more.
So I think the thing worth noting here is historically we can get loan approval pretty quick, right? And in a lot of cases, if you've done a TBD, which like we'll underwrite an
What's
entire,
a TBD?
It's a to be determined property, right? So
Fully underwritten,
we will
subject
fully
to the appraisal.
underwrite a property without, or fully underwrite a borrower without them having a subject property. So sometimes you're going under contract already with loan approval,
Right.
right? So historically what happens is the appraisal comes second.
Right.
We've already got loan approval, or we get it pretty quick and we're still waiting on the appraisal. This is basically saying appraisal first, loan approval second.
Yeah, so kind of what you were just explaining is you're giving a loan approval with conditions of, checking to make sure they
Yeah.
still work and
You still got a job.
Yeah, you
Yep.
still got a job, and that it does appraise to meet the conditions of the loan. What the language of this is stating now, so how it's changed, is that the appraisal is no longer a condition of the approval.
It's all the same package.
Right.
Has to be.
You have to have the appraisal done prior to getting a full approval.
Okay.
And now where
Doesn't
this
mean it has to be done first. It just has to be part of.
Yeah, but the thing that like in today's market, we're seeing appraisals take like here in the Tampa Bay area
2 to 3 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks. There's other parts of the country, which I know this is Florida specific contract, but we're seeing like in Washington State 4 weeks or longer for an appraisal. So
which makes it so important that as an agent,
communicating.
I'm
Yep,
calling
to
you
your
and
point.
saying,
Yep.
how long is an appraisal taking? Because if an appraisal is taking 4 weeks and I've got 4 weeks on my closing date, I just screwed my buyer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And another piece of this too is that there is a 3-day window. So if your buyer doesn't get loan approval or doesn't get loan approval by the deadline, the seller has 3 days where they can cancel the contract. The buyer still gets their escrow money back, but it's now the ball's kind of in the buyer's court, or sorry, the seller's court. So,
So can I ask a question? Then?
Sure.
So you're saying then after 3 days, if the seller chooses to keep the contract going, that no longer is a factor.
That's no longer a factor, and the loan approval is deemed to be have been received. So the financing contingency is gone.
Go.
So when people are writing a closing date in their sales contract, they really need to look at a calendar. And if you're talking to your lender and you're hearing 4 weeks to get the appraisal back, you need to take that in consideration for how long it's going to take for the loan approval. And if it's going to take 5 weeks for loan approval because of the delay with appraisals, then you need to make your closing date 6 weeks out, not the same day.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have a window in there.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But we can preach this until we're blue in the face, and so many people still don't get it. I actually, for our team, I created like a little timeline of, when the deadlines of things
Sure.
are. So then you calculate your closing date. You don't just throw a dart and say, "Oh, I'd like to be in there."
Then I think we can make the end of the month. Fine.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a holiday in there too, but we won't count that.
Yeah. So
It'll get done.
So it's like, let's look at all the deadlines of the contract and then calculate out our closing date after we've had conversations with our team members. That's really how it should be done. But there's another major change in this contract regarding the sale of a buyer's property that I thought was very important too, that falls within this financing contingency.
Yes.
So I had asked you, so if I bring you a buyer and say, hey, Bryan, this guy needs to be pre-approved. He's got to sell his house to get financing, but I'm not going to put that I'm not going to add that rider to the contract, because if I do, he won't get the contract.
Yeah. You're asking me to leave it out of the pre-approval? Mm-hmm. That's a hard no.
No.
How many times do you guys get asked
All the time.
All the time, right. So what this language, it actually says, and it's hard to read this because there's so many colors and strikeouts, but it says loan approval which requires buyer to sell other real property shall not be deemed considered loan approval unless rider V is attached. So what that language is doing is making it a requirement that if somebody's getting a loan and they have to sell a home, that rider or that addendum for the sale of the buyer's property has to be attached to the contract, which helps so much because there are so many realtors that, they know that their buyer's offer is not going to get accepted if they have to sell a house.
Yeah, and here's a big reason I think that this matters too. So we kind of keep track of the reason either loans don't close, deals don't close, or they do late. Mm-hmm. You would be surprised that most of the time, high 90s, it's got nothing to do with the financing.
I'm not surprised by that.
Right? It's got to do with some sort of title issue, the ability to get homeowners insurance. Like there's a million other reasons, home inspection, whatever, repairs that need to be done on the property. Like we could just keep going on and on. But those are all things that can hold up that other sale. Right? And when you start getting those back-to-back sales like that, like there could be a long line of, hey, this closing's holding up this one, which is now holding up this one, which is now holding up this one.
We're seeing that
and
so much.
And it may have nothing to do with the financing of the property. Most likely doesn't have anything to do with the financing.
But it's so much easier for me just to point my finger
just
at
blame
you.
us. We got it. We got it. Hey, he who does not show up at the closing table gets blamed. That's why you go to your closings.
Yeah, so those are definitely two of the big changes that I'm seeing in the contract. And another thing that stood out to me, and I have to go back, I don't remember if this is a change or just language that popped up because it's kind of a pet peeve of mine regarding permitting. And this might not be something that you guys come up against much, but so in our area, an open permit gets confused all the time with a lien on the property, and they're completely different. So your title search is going to look for liens on the property, which might encumber the insurance, right? Well, a permit doesn't create any impact on the title insurance at all. But however, guess who does the search for open permits?
Title
does, right? Guess when the open permit search has to be done according to the contract?
I would hope it's done at the beginning.
Right.
During the inspection period.
Okay.
During the inspection period, it actually falls under inspection.
So Rachel, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
You're an agent. If you're taking a listing, why wouldn't you be getting this at the time you take the listing?
Oh.
You're choosing title anyway.
Oh, but if I do that, then I have to disclose it. I'm just joking.
I'll write that offer letter without the.
Let me just tell you this. Disclosure. Okay, a huge pet peeve of mine for every realtor, investor, anybody out there.